The world has been a challenging place for a while now, and the quilting world has had its fair share. Past years, economic challenges have hit some businesses very hard. Today's guest, Devaney Soebbing of Quilt Addicts Anonymous, has had to deal with a failure last year. And in this socially connected world, it's really hard to hide. She was very generous in sharing how her life has changed and the steps she's had to take to get back on her feet again. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Devaney Soebbing. Welcome to the show, Devaney. Where in the world are you coming to us from?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm coming to you from Rock Island, Illinois. It is right on the Mississippi River, right where I-80 meets Illinois and Iowa.
So did you grow up in a crafty home?
I grew up in a home that always encouraged creativity. As a kid, my mom was always coming up with some kind of an art project for us. I remember finger painting on our linoleum floor in our basement and with my sister. It was a lot of fun. Both of my grandmothers knit, so I was actually learned to knit before I learned to sew. And I made doll clothes with my grandma as well. And my dad was very creative, but in a different way. He was an electrician. And so when he put things together, he had to, I mean, obviously it had to work and it had to be to code. So I think I get my ability to not just create the design, but also instructions that make sense and be able to do all the math from his side.
I was just talking about this morning. I think a lot of pioneer women that were quilters, I think they were just engineers that just were not able to do that.
Absolutely. And like when you talk about, women being on the spectrum, we invented quilting, we certainly, our brains can think in all kinds of different ways. Who else is going to cut apart perfectly good fabric and put it back together in all these crazy different ways to create something beautiful?
So what came first for you, quilting or your YouTube channel?
Quilting definitely came first. It was definitely like my relaxation hobby. It was my thing that I did. And I, like everyone, I wasn't very good when I started. I learned basically watching Fonz and Porter on PBS because at the time YouTube existed, but not in the capacity that it does today. You couldn't just look up a video and figure out how to quilt. So I did things like for, a year and a half, I sewed with a 3/8 inch seam allowance because I didn't know that the standard dressmaker's presser foot wasn't a 1/4 inch. So I had a really consistent 3/8 inch seam because I would line it up with the side, but I just didn't have the knowledge or anyone to look at it and say, hey, that's not right. You need a 1/4 inch presser foot or to move your needle. So eventually I got hooked up with my local guild. And once I did that, then I learned about quilt shops in the area, and I took 1 to 2 classes every single month. And my guild is fortunate enough to be able to bring in some pretty big names. So, I didn't care what it was. If it was a technique I hadn't tried, I would do it and I would make it king size. So that way I would get it figured out. And this is all pre-kids, when you have time to like come home and sew for hours and no one's going to bother you about that. It's all good. And the house stays relatively clean-ish because you don't have little ones running around and doing everything at every opportunity. So that was a really fun time. And I was working at a newspaper and I was writing a blog that was called Home Rookies, where I detailed my misadventures as a first-time homeowner in updating a home that had pretty much stood still since the 1980s until we bought it in 2010. I knew that the folks there would not always want to know about my quilting. So I started a blog and then eventually a YouTube channel where I literally record things in like one take. And then that would go up. And because, that's kind of how a lot of us start when we're just kind of figuring it out. Because of the journalism background, though, I knew how to edit video. I knew how to shoot video, all of that. So once I was able to start investing in better technology, I already had the skills to turn it into something that was easy to follow along and learn something from.
Now, how long have you been doing YouTube?
I had probably started not long after we moved into the house. So probably somewhere around 2011 is my guess. Well, probably when my daughter was in preschools when I really started to take it seriously, because that's when we expanded into a brick and mortar shop and I was selling material online. And the brick and mortar really wasn't growing because I focused specifically on modern quilting fabric only. And we have a very traditional quilting community here in the Quad Cities. Even though there are a lot of them, I wasn't their jam. And so I realized that if we were going to really grow and be able to make a go of it, that I would have to put more time and energy into the online component. And so I hired someone to just work every Thursday so that I could go at the time my studio was in my sunroom and just film something and get it on for the next week. So that was the first kind of investment. Let's see, my daughter had been in preschool at the time and 4, so she's 10 now. So about 6 years of really trying to really focus in on it.
And when the pandemic hit, was COVID good for your business or did it harm it?
It was good. It's horrible to say that because so many people had so many negative things happen. It was a wild time though. I had a baby 6 weeks before the country shut down, and I had a book deadline, and I had a kindergartner who was now learning at home. And so I have photos of me like cutting mask kits like in front of me. And on the floor is my 6-week-old in a bouncy seat sleeping. And next to me is the kindergartner doing whatever online school they were trying to figure out because nobody knew what anyone was doing at that point. And then on the other side of like basically right in front of our front door. I call it a foyer, but it's just a hallway. My husband's like packaging stuff to ship out. I was planning on having like a really long maternity leave. It's what I was planning. And that did not happen. And it was just crazy because what I did was I looked up online. I figured we should sell some elastic to make masks. And I realized that all 4 distributors that sell to quilt shops were out of elastic. I knew it was made overseas and that we weren't getting any anytime soon because all of that had stopped. So I made a tutorial, shot it, edited it, got it published in 1 day on how to transform any mask pattern from using elastic to using ties. And we've had videos go viral before this one, but it was instantly huge. We did like 1 million views in a week. We sold out of every single piece of fabric we had in our store like in a weekend for mask kits. We just kept putting them up and they would go out. And so I would cut it and put it in like a tub that you would store like, your clothes in, and we would drop it off on our employees' doorsteps with everything they needed to package it up. And then it would come back to us and my husband would prep it for shipping. And then we hired my neighbor. And so we drop it on her doorstep and she would do all the labeling and then it would come back to us. It was just wild to figure out how to make it work. And then we had a subscription club too. So we also had to figure out how to make that work and keep everybody safe so that there would only be like 1 person in at a time. And, everyone had a lot of time. People were doing a lot of things at home. So at that time, our subscription club really grew significantly through like 2022. And then once the Fed started raising interest rates, that's when everything changed for us. And instead of seeing year-over-year growth pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and after pandemic, that's when everything started to slide because, we are an extra. I have probably thousands of yards right over here in my fabric stash. And I don't even consider myself that bad of a collector of fabric. Most of the stuff that I got, I made into quilts. And this is only a section of what I have behind me. There's about 150 quilts. So I can only imagine what other people have. And if you have to choose between cutting your budget back because your gas, your food, and your other dailies are more expensive, I can see why a lot of people would be like, well, I'll just buy to finish. It makes it hard on shops. And, you want to support your local quilt shops. I'm sure there are ways to do it. You're always going to need your thread, your needles, your rotary cutter replacement blades. Those things do add up. So if you want to make sure your local shop stays there, but you are on a budget, just make sure you're buying from there instead of, the little bit cheaper options, because we want our shops to make it through these challenging economic times.
Did you have a book or patterns that help fuel your growth?
So with our subscription club, we would send out back quarters every single month from a collection. It was a different amount over time, but at the end it was about 10 that went out. And then there was a add-on kit that people could get to make sure they had the whole collection. About 50 or so people, and it would just fluctuate up and down a little bit from there. And my husband said, do you think you could do a pattern a month inspired by the fabric? And I was like one of those hold my beer moments. And I designed a pattern a month for more than 4 years, inspired by the fabrics, plus, whatever else I was doing to work with brands. And when I did a fabric collection, it all came from that. And I did books in between. So I've designed close to, I think, 150 patterns in the last 6 or 8 years. It's a lot. It's really fun. And I haven't done as much designing because I kind of needed a little bit of a break since everything kind of shut down some. But I'm doing a lot behind the scenes now as I work on my next book, which is all about quilt panels.
I saw that. One of your videos was 3 different ways to use panels.
That's what inspired the book, actually. I sent it to my publisher and they're like, yes, let's do that.
Are you finding difficulty with the panels now being digitally printed? Like I'm finding a problem with some of the threads twirl and I get that bleed. How do you solve that problem?
I have seen that in some of them. Making sure that you've got a nice sharp needle always helps, especially in the quilting part. If you are going to be quilting that, definitely put in a brand new needle when you get to it. Otherwise, what I find is most of the pull happens when I'm at like the edge of the fabric. Like, when you're working around the outsides of your quilt, it will like pull from there out. So what I always do, and I do this no matter what quilt I'm doing because it helps me have a nice square top when I'm finished, is the first thing I do when I start a quilt or advance it on the long arm is I always stitch within where the binding is going to be covered. So like 1/8 of an inch from the outside. And that keeps everything really nice and square when you're going around because you have nice straight edges, you have good tops. And I used to just pin it, but that results in like a really wavy side. This way you just straight up and down, nice and square. Everything is gorgeous. So I do it for that reason, but it also helps cutting down on fabric pulls because if it is going to pull, it's going to pull from there out instead of within where you're working.
When did you become an author? You've got 4 books. Is it 4 books you have out?
This is my 4th book, and I contributed to a 5th that my publisher put together about t-shirt quilts. I submitted, actually, this is kind of a funny story. So I was invited to go cover Kafe's first quilt exhibition within the United States. And it was in Philadelphia, which is nowhere near where I live, but my accountant basically told me how to make it work. It was a great ride out. I read Kafe's autobiography in preparation for the interview. The interview went really good. It was really inspiring because that was the first time I really had been exposed to modern quilting fabrics. And before that, I would get like the brightest fabrics I could find, but there's a lot of repro out here, a lot of traditional, which is pretty. It's just not my jam. And the way back though, it was quite the crowd on the train. And we got the cheap seats. So you're like sleeping with strangers all around you. And my daughter was just over a year old at the time. So I'm like holding her like this because I was just like really concerned about what was going to happen. Because like right when we got on, there's a woman next to me who's talking really loudly on her cell phone. And I hear, if I didn't have Jesus, I'd have killed that lady. And I'm just like, I'm glad you have Jesus. And then we're in an observation car and there's another guy, making chit chat. And he is asking where everybody's from. And we're going through this beautiful forested area. There's this creek and everything. It's just a really pretty area to just drive through on the train. And he totally ruined it because this woman said she was from California. And he goes, man, you couldn't get away with nothing out there. If you kill somebody, you put them out in the desert, you find that body right quick. Here, you just throw it one of these places, you never find it again. And I'm just like, I'm sleeping 2 rows up from body dump guy and across from the lady who thankfully has Jesus. And I'm holding my 1-year-old and the train is stopping all through the night for people to get off. And I'm like someone's going to steal my child and I'm never going to see this child again. Because, your mom senses are going nuts at this point. So I was just like sketching all through the night, these quilt patterns. And at like 3 in the morning, I was emailing a PR person that I knew from a book publisher that I often did like reviews for. And she encouraged me to keep going with it. And at Market, I met a acquisition editor and she put in my proposal and it didn't get accepted at first. So do not like feel like, all is lost if your first book proposal is not accepted. But eventually it did get accepted elsewhere. I had a lot of quilts at Quilt Market at the time, and the publishing company saw it and loved what I did. And so my first proposal ended up getting picked up there. And now I actually work with the original publishing person that I spoke with, moved to my new publisher, and the acquisition editor I originally worked with is now also at my publisher. So there's these women that I've had these relationships with for like 10 years that I now get to like work with on the regular, which is really exciting.
So you had published patterns before the quilt?
Yes. So I published patterns before I had a shop. I designed this block of the month from scratch to teach at my local quilt shop. And we ended up with about 5 people in the class. And I thought that was just way too much work for 5 people. So I put it online thinking that maybe 50 people would follow along. And by the end of the first year, it was 12,000 people from all over the world. And these are like the videos that I used to film in one take when the YouTube channel started. So it was really a wild thing. From there, it just kept growing and growing, and eventually added on fabric and kits and all the things.
Now, your channel's like my channel in that mental health is a portion of what you talk about. You've had some significant issues this past year. Can you talk about them and how you're working to keep your mental health in check?
Yeah, it's definitely something that has been a challenge. The biggest thing that's been hard for me this year has been getting back on camera. I think it's because YouTube was such a huge driver in building the business that every time I like get ready, it's a constant reminder of what it was and what I lost. Because, Quilt Addicts Anonymous is still here, but it is a shell of what it was. It's really just the patterns and the tutorials at this point. And it's just me, there's no team. And occasionally my husband, when I can loop him into helping me fold patterns to sell for wholesale. So it's really challenging to go through that. And I've struggled with anxiety pretty much my entire adult life at varying degrees. And it's been pretty bad this last year. And I've had about 3 significant depression episodes, one of which, was as I was dealing with everything, figuring out what was going to happen next. Because when you have a business that is the size that ours was, we'd done $1 million in sales in 2022. And then by July of 2023, we only made half of what we needed in order to keep the lights on and everybody paid. That's a significant financial loss. And we had loans that we could make the payments on no problem when we were doing well. But, obviously not when you're making half what you need to make. So there's still legal things going on to figure out all of that. And that's just really hard to deal with. To have climbed so high and then drop down so fast is just challenging, I think, for anyone. So there was a lot of challenge over the last year. I've been doing a lot of things like off camera almost. And like I've been making my daughter skirts this week because I cannot buy off the rack for her school uniform because I can't get the correct waist measurement and the correct length to make the nuns happy. So I've got to make those from scratch. So that's fun. I've been doing a lot of slow sewing as well, some English paper piecing, because I don't have to crank out at the same speed. And I feel like I'm finally at a point where most of the time I can get myself all done up and come down and film. It's definitely a challenge. Medication helps. Talking about it helps. Journaling really helps me. And like I recently started journaling like back to the beginning, like when I started having these issues and as a young adult, like a 19, 20-year-old, and what precipitated that? What about my experiences as a child that helped shape me. And then like the first big episode that ended up leading to my first bout of challenge with mental health when I was 20, how is that contributing to where I'm still at today? And so that's definitely something that I still think about a lot, and it takes work. You can't just think, okay, I'm just going to be fine. I'm going to take a pill and I'll be fine. Like you have to think about it and be mindful about it and really not be critical of yourself, but just honestly look at yourself and think, how did I get here? And how can I reshape my experiences, or at least the way I look at my experiences, to be able to move forward in a healthy way?
How are you doing?
There are a lot of ups and downs. Last week was a big down, big down, probably one of my worst downs. This week I'm doing a lot better because I got some help and, reached out and got the help I needed. And so now I'm looking at it a lot better, with fresher eyes, feeling like I'm ready to tackle everything. And I know that, there will be another down, and that's fine. It's never a straight line of up. It's never a straight line of down. You're always gonna go back and forth. But, identifying what you need to do that. Like I had a conversation with my husband. Like I grew up in purity culture in the church, and that was not great for my long-term mental health because it ties a lot of your self-worth to things that I don't think are realistic in today's world to uphold. I still struggle sometimes with, the aftermath of that and how I thought about myself in the aftermath of that. So I had my husband read a book that basically really broke down what my experience was. So he kind of knew like where I was coming from. And we've been together 15 years. Our 15th wedding anniversary is in 2 days. It's not like he hasn't heard me talk about this. Thank you. It's not like he hasn't heard me talk about this, many, many times. But, I identified that, my first real issue with depression and anxiety was related to that. And so I'm trying to get him to truly understand and having conversations. I have a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old. They fight like cats and dogs, or they completely love each other, and there is absolutely no in between. And so having conversations of, I know that you're get frustrated and you yell, and I do too, but like right now I need it to be more calm. And I need to not take it to that level. I mask a lot where I'm like, oh, I'm fine, to the world. You present yourself as fine. And I think you probably, I'm sure every YouTuber has gotten on a day when they didn't feel like it at all. And, you just act like, oh, we're good. Let's talk about this. And
I find I suffer from, I don't believe I can do it. And sometimes I have to watch videos of myself and going, see, you've done it before.
Yeah.
Like, and I know it's silly, but some days that's what I have to do.
Yeah. For me, it's just getting the makeup on. If I can do the hair and the makeup, I'm set. I'm good. But for whatever reason, that's the hard part for me. And I woke up with a giant zit this morning, and I was like, well, I can't back out of this. We're going to do the heavy trick of makeup that my esthetician taught me for when she does the bridal clients, and no one will be able to tell. It'll be fine. You just have to know your triggers, know what you have to do to be able to get past it. And if you need a break, you need a break. One of the things I was talking with a therapist about was like my husband was trying desperately to get me to take my dog for a walk last week, and I just couldn't do it. I love my dog. Like I call him my son. He's with me all the time. And I just could not take that dog for a walk. And, you have to think about it is like, can you take the dog for the walk, or do you just not have it in you today? Are you taking the dog for a walk because it will make you appear normal to everybody else? Are you masking? Are you taking the dog for a walk because the dog will enjoy it? Or are you taking the dog for a walk because you think it will help you? Or are you actually taking the dog for a walk because you want to take the dog for a walk? And it's so many levels to that one simple action of taking the dog for a walk when you are struggling with mental health. Obviously the goal is to get to the point where you're taking the dog for a walk because you want to take the dog for a walk. But it's okay if you're at any point in between, including, I just can't take the dog for a walk today. I'm just going to sit and snuggle with him instead. especially as like a mother, if you're having a down day, you can't just not do anything for your kids. You still have to do all the things. You have to ask them about school. You have to be excited about it, all those things, and make sure they have what they need and keep the schedule and basically be the manager of the household. It's not that I have a really great husband who contributes a ton. Like I know how good I have it because I hear what my friends and have to deal with their spouses. I know I have it great, but it's still really challenging. That sometimes it takes everything you have. You do the work you have to do for the day. You do and put on the smiley mom face for the kids, and that's it. Maybe that's all I have for today, and that's okay.
When you're a mother, you suffer from thinking that if you just put everything in the box in the right way, everything's going to fit. And I think we're all under the misconception that there is this magical way. We just need to figure out the way to do it. I think there's just no way it's ever going to work. And you cannot see that until later when your kids have left home and you realize, oh, I should have put that down. Oh, that wasn't that important. Why did I insist that we all had to do that and add that to your list of things to do?
I have fully accepted that the concept of having it all is not realistic. It just is not. You are not going to be able to, kick ass and take names at work and be the best mother possible who always has the homemade everything and all the baked goods or whatever and handcrafted stuff and run them to all their activities and have a perfect home that looks gorgeous and never has anything out of place, and be able to have time for yourself as a human, to be able to give yourself the, what you need to just function and thrive. It's just not possible. And not that I think we should go back to women being in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant. That would be horrible for me. I could not do that. But I love being a mom, but I'm not satisfied just being a mom. And I think that that's okay to say. I tell my girls, I have two girls, I tell my older one that all the time because she's capable of understanding that. I think once you realize that it's okay to let some things slide so that you and your kids are good, or you and your relationship with your significant other is good. Those are the main things. If the house is a mess, well, wait till you have a 3-day weekend. Fix it. Do what you can then.
So I think of quilting as a key component of mental health. Now, since quilting for you is also tied to your business and the failure there, have you been able to go back to quilting the same way?
I have, but in a little bit different way. So a lot of my quilting before was always very deadline based because of what I needed to do every month in about a week and a half. I would look at the fabric, design a quilt to go with it, write the pattern, make the quilt from start to finish, including all the quilting and binding, which I usually cheated on. I usually glued that binding down. And then I would also have to film a video tutorial on it, both for the piecing and the quilting component of it. So it was a lot to do, like in a 1 week or 1.5 week time span. Plus manage a team of 14 while you're doing that, and kids and whatever else. So that part where I'm going crazy like that, I've really tried to avoid. I'm working on my book, but it's all pretty easy projects because panels should be easy projects. You shouldn't be going crazy with a panel project. It's something you can get done quickly. And there's a lot of different types of projects in the book. Some of them are as simple as like placemats where you literally piece nothing because the panel has been designed to be a complete placemat and you just don't have to do anything besides put some interfacing in between and call it a day. Some of them are a little more complicated, but I've been really trying to limit the work sewing to like just that type of thing. I've been doing a lot of other crafts or using quilting in a different way. Like on the cruise that we went on with Ray and John for RG Travels, I brought with my Tula Nova that I had started years ago when the fabric came out. I think my kid was in preschool at the time, so 6 years ago or so. And that's just hand stitching. And so I spent a good day just sitting poolside looking out at the ocean, hand stitching. And, it's almost meditative when you do it that way because it's not a deadline. You just are enjoying the process of sewing, and that's great. And I've done things for my kids and done a few activities that are quilt-esque in order to kind of still have that connection, but have it definitively be not work sewing. Like I designed a Clara costume for my daughter for Halloween and really Franken pattern and altered the bejesus out of it in order to turn this like 1990s fancy nightgown into an actual ballet costume with a double circle skirt for ultimate spin and playing with all the trims and making that happen. And right now I'm making her skirts for her school uniform so that she has clothes that actually fit because she's very slim. And so finding things that actually fit her and have the length are challenging. And we entered a contest at our local museum. It's called Garbage Glam. And so we're going to be making a Queen of Hearts dress from the latest installment of the Descendants series out of trash. So it's going to be really fun. Like we have plans to like weave a coat from like extra chip bags and Coke plastic, all that type of stuff. It's going to be really fun. We're both really excited about it, and we've been ideating over what we're going to do. It's skills that I learned. Like I learned how to do fabric weaving through quilting, but I'm going to do it with literal garbage and sew it together to make this really cool vest. And we're going to, go to the thrift store and come with it. So it's, just taking the craft and taking the enjoyment and doing it in a different way. And I've also taken some time to dabble with embroidery and crochet. And I've spent more time knitting, which is usually like my take along project anyway. I always did that as my like definitively non-work creative thing. I'm actually a pretty accomplished knitter. I typically do like a sweater a year, and then I learned how to do socks, and I'm experimenting with color work. And so I'm still very creative. I'm just trying to do it in a very non-work way, if that makes sense.
Have you been in contact with Mr. Domestic? Because he did a whole thing about weaving fabric.
Yes. So we met each other very early on, and I haven't chatted with him recently, but I definitely keep up with him and what he's up to. You meet so many people when you're like a professional in the quilting industry. It's like becoming fast friends with somebody that sometimes you meet like once a year or something, or maybe you just know them on the internet from talking back and forth. But yeah, he's a great guy. He also deals a lot with mental health, learning to let things go. And he's received a lot of flack for being his authentic self, but I think he handles it really well.
How did you enjoy your cruise?
I really love the cruise. It was the first time I'd been away from my kids for that long of time. And a very good friend of mine, Chantel Irish, who is at So Freaking Awesome on Instagram, she came with me. We've known each other since college. We've like a 20-year friendship at this point. And she also got into quilting as like a way to help mental health. We just get each other, and because we've had a lot of similar life experiences and we've known each other for so long. And she also was her first time being away from her kids for that significant amount of time. So it was really great to just like enjoy it with somebody who appreciated it as much as you did. So in the Azores, we did hear that there was a fabric shop. Someone did find one, but we were kind of just like puttering around. Like we didn't do any excursions on that one because it was our first time off the ship. We wanted to just wander. And I found the streets to be so inspiring. I have so many photos on my phone of just how the streets pavers are put together and with different colors and everything. So once I get this book done, I want to like actually look at everything and see what I can quiltify from that. I've made like 2 quilts based off the tile in my bathroom. So this is not a new thing for me where you like look at something and are like, oh yes, that needs to be a quilt somehow. This one was so cool. It was like this general store that you would have like envisioned like back in the 50s in the US, where you could get pretty much anything you needed. There were like some food and household goods and whatever else. Then in the back, there's all this fabric and trim and notions and whatever you needed. And my next book that I'm trying to get my publisher to let me do is with my friend Chantel, where we want to do doll clothes, but like modern doll clothes, not like stuff that like would have been really cool when I was in the 90s as a kid, because that's a lot of what's out there right now. That's not like what you would find at like American Girl, that's it's not what the kids are going to like. So we want to kind of have some fun with that. So my mission while I was there was to find as many tiny prints as possible in like garment fabric. So that was like my mission at every single stop that we were at.
Now, you had a couple of other people on that cruise with you. The Crafty Nomad was with you.
Yeah, she was able to come. There was only one extra sewing machine, so I did not participate in her class besides to sit in and see how it worked because I was very interested in the whole improv curve situation. I've done curves that are more traditional and I got that down, but I love seeing new techniques, applying that eventually. I don't know about you, but like when I think about new patterns and ways to implement things, I am often like someone where I see it and then it percolates in my brain. And then at some random interval, way later, is when it kind of comes together and it's like, oh, yes, this is what this needs to become at some point. That's how I always was with my patterns too. I would look at the fabric when it came in, and someone would give me a fat quarter bundle and I would order it in color order. And then I would just wait a couple of days and all of a sudden that fabric would tell me what it wanted to grow up and become in life. And it worked out pretty well the majority of the time.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been lovely catching up with you and getting to know you. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
We've got a couple of places, obviously YouTube, and there will be more videos. A lot of my creative juices have been going to getting the book finished, but that is just about done. So I've actually been filming quite a bit, but it's nothing that's going to come out until like next spring. The main website is shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. That's where you can find all the patterns and my books. Obviously, the YouTube channel has a lot of videos. You also can take some paid courses over at academy.quiltaddictsanonymous.com.
Well, thank you for being on the show today. It was great getting to know you.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed my interview with Stephanie Soebbing. I am so glad that she's getting back to her channel and making new content. If you are interested in checking out her channel, her website, or her books, I'll leave links to them in the video notes below. I will also leave her contact info. The next time you're in your sewing room, have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many interesting people on this show. Let one inspire you. And don't forget to check out my last video. Take care, and I'll see you next time.